can't explain it. Why are you explaining it now when you just said you don't even know what the framework is?
I didn't say that. That's the thing that you wanted to yell about because, yeah, there he goes.
But Destiny, I don't understand your argument here anyways. It's clear that the federal courts were weighing in, saying that these maps couldn't be drawn this way. And then in 2019, the Supreme Court came in and said that that was changing, that these maps were not something that could be adjudicated by federal courts. So it seems like you're arguing just for the sake of arguing.
Well, no, the argument is that we all had an understanding of what Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act meant, and Alito basically destroyed this entire thing such that it's no longer a congressional law, which is kind of irritating because in the past they've appealed so much to, say that like for Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, well, the Congress has to write a law to go further to tell us what they really mean. And then we've had Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act that Congress and the Supreme Court have had an understanding of what it's meant for a long time. And now the Supreme Court has basically nullified Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and said we can now do racial gerrymandering. Okay. We can do all partisan gerrymandering. It's okay to do that now.
And now we can circle back to my explanation, which is that Section 2 of the VRA says you cannot give a racial minority bloc lesser opportunity. But post-2019, in RUCO, when partisan gerrymandering was resolved, you can partisan gerrymander anyone, including white people. Anybody can be partisan gerrymandered. So if a minority group is partisan gerrymandered, they do not have a lesser opportunity than the majority does, but you still because the majority is also being partisan gerrymandered.
So you can't actually say that. You can't say I'm going to racially gerrymander. Even Alito says that would still be tossed. But you can say that you're partisanly gerrymandering, which is the only reason why you would ever do a racial gerrymander. So racial gerrymandering has, in effect, through a legal alchemy, has been made legal by Alito, in direct contradiction to what would have been hoped for by the Voting Rights Act.
So to quote Thomas Sowell, when you're used to preferential treatment, equality feels like discrimination. Yes, Destiny.
I don't know why we're
because in a world
arguments like
in a world where everybody is being partisan gerrymandered, it would be a special privilege given only to minority groups not to be partisan gerrymandered. So yes, if in a world where everyone is being partisan gerrymandered, minority blocs are not given lesser opportunity by being treated the exact same as the majority bloc. If you're being treated the exact same, that's not a lesser opportunity. That's the same.
But that's why. But we didn't want to treat them the exact same. That's why Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act existed. That's the whole point.
Okay, but that's not what they wrote. In Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, it says that it's illegal if you use these means to give these minority blocs a lesser opportunity. That's the language that they used in the Voting Rights Act.
I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Proton VPN. My audience knows I'm a huge tech boomer, and so I started using Proton VPN to stop with the constant tracking, and it's been a game changer. Proton VPN hides your IP from websites, advertisers, and the government, so you can access the web without being tracked. Proton VPN has a strict no logs policy that's been verified by independent security audits, and it has unlimited bandwidth even on the free option. Click the link in the description to try Proton VPN 100% free. It helps the show, and more importantly, it empowers you to take control of your internet privacy.
They said that if in a totality of circumstances, it seemed like minority voters in a state had their vote consistently overturned by majority voters in a state, that would be bad, that they would have the right to bring a Section 2 claim, basically, through the Gingles or Jingles framework, however you pronounce it, and that they would be allowed to have a majority-minority map drawn if they were consistently getting overturned by the majority white voters, basically, in that state.
Okay, Destiny, do you think that's the direct quote from what they said? Is that the operative legal terminology, you think?
Well, considering that you just Googled it and you're looking at it right now and you're going to pretend that you've memorized the language, my guess is I'm probably not quoting it exactly, but I think I got the spirit of the law correct. Yes.
Okay. So when Alito was talking about this law and saying, using this phrase about about opportunity, you think that he was just making it up? Wasn't in the law at all?
He literally did make it up. Yes. If you actually read the case, which I know you didn't, because you don't read any of these that you talk about, he goes through each of the words and he basically invents his own cool definition. And then from there, everything kind of logically follows. So he defines opportunity as the way you're defining it right now in a novel way that's never been defined or applied in any prior Supreme Court case. And then that's where he arrives at his
an
updated Google's framework.
If the majority is being partisan gerrymandered, and the minorities are being partisan gerrymandered, how is that unequal?
Well, if the minority, if their opportunity to have a vote to send a representative to the Congress is consistently overturned by the majority race of that state, then under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, then you would say it seems like, they have been frustrated. Their vote has been...
but my ability to put somebody into Congress is also being frustrated by partisan gerrymandering. How is it unequal that partisan gerrymandering is legal in both cases unless there's some overt racial issue that's involved?
Because
like my state partisan gerrymanders me, Destiny.
The partisan gerrymander was not what it was about. It was about racial groups having their voice represented.
Technically, you're right. Partisan gerrymander was not what it was about. In fact, I agree with Justice Thomas and Justice Gorsuch that partisan gerrymandering was never actually covered by the VRA, and this whole thing has been a misadventure in law to act that it ever did. What it actually covered was things like poll taxes, literacy tests, actual denial of the right to vote, or actual denial of your right to have your vote counted. That's what it covered. But if we're going to say that we're going to not use that argument, then we are stuck with its language, which includes this idea that you cannot have minority groups treated less than the majority groups. But if you're treating them equally to the majority groups, you're not treating them less than the majority.
But they wouldn't be treated equally if their vote is always overtaken by the majority groups in the state.
My vote is always overtaken, Destiny.
My vote in what state?
New Jersey.
In New Jersey, white people don't have their candidates of choice elected to the House of Representatives?
No, in New Jersey, I live in districts that are broken up on partisan lines so that somebody who's going to vote for the right will not be able to get...
That has
yes, it is. Because when they...
Where in the Voting Rights Act does it talk about partisanship? It's talking about majority, minority, racial groups.
Yes, and in...
You as a white person have more what other white people are voting for in New Jersey.
Those candidates are... And in Louisiana, the issue there is that when they drew up the map, they drew it up on partisan lines, and it also happened to have an impact on minority blocks. That's the issue.
Minority people vote along partisan lines, of course.
Yes.
Always, yes.
Correct.
But the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act said that if minority groups' votes were consistently being defeated by the majority racial group, that they are allowed to have a majority-minority district created. They were allowed to bring a Section 2 Voting Rights Act case to the Supreme Court to have a district
to the district court. But yeah, you bring it to a district court, definitely. But yeah, but that's what it means when you say less opportunity than what?
Than the other racial group.
Then, yeah. And in a world where partisan gerrymandering is the norm, where everyone's getting partisan gerrymandered, you don't have less opportunity if you are being treated the same.
You do if the racial groups vote on partisan lines. If there was a black party and a white party, literally, then the black party was all gerrymandered out on partisan lines, according to
there basically is, Destiny, a black party in Louisiana.
Exactly, and the Voting Rights Act said, Section 2, you can't do that. But now Alito says you can.
Which then would mean that uniquely in Louisiana cannot gerrymander on partisan lines, but California can, but Nevada can, but Massachusetts can, but all these other states can.
Wait, not if they're frustrating a minority group's vote.
Well, they're not frustrating a minority group's vote.
Then there's no problem under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. But there would be in Louisiana if they were.
The technical distinction, Destiny, is that the minorities are, of course, still able to vote regardless of gerrymandering.
It's not about if you're able to vote. It's if you're able to have a vote that is represented in your state's House elections that isn't consistently defeated by the majority race.
Okay, 1 second. That's insane. You don't really believe that, right? That can't be the interpretation.
That's what
no.
For 37 years, that's how the Supreme Court has understood it, and that's how all the legislature have understood it.
Okay, but if that's the case, let's say a particular state, we'll say hypothetically is 10% black. And for those 10% blacks, we're so unracist, we give them those 10% to draw the map they want. And still they lose. You say, according to the Voting Rights Act, they're not allowed to lose. The mere fact that they lost implies that the Voting Rights Act has been violated because blacks have a right to win. That's bullshit. That's not what the Voting Rights Act says. It says that you can't have special tools designed to disenfranchise people based on race. It doesn't say they're guaranteed to win, and if they lose too much, then we have to change something. That's ridiculous.
I agree. That's why there was a test to determine whether or not a minority group was being frustrated by the majority group. This was the, I don't know if you remember the Jingles or Gingles framework.
It's the Gingles test, yeah.
Yes, the idea was you have to represent a sizable minority group that is in a contiguous district. So it can't be 10% of people scattered throughout the state. And their vote has to be consistently defeated by the majority racial group of the state. These are the three preconditions for this framework to be met. So if it was the case that black people voted 50-50, half Republican, half Democrat, you have no Section 2 case. If it was the fact, you have no voting rights act case. If it was the fact that the black people were equally scattered throughout the state, you can't make a contiguous district, you have no case. If they're 1% of the population of the state, then they don't represent a sizable minority, you have no case. So there were plenty of defeaters built into Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act to make sure that these types of cases, exactly these types of cases, wouldn't be brought before any courts, any federal courts.
Rob, can you pull up my screen? So, Destiny, this is the map that Louisiana was forced to draw under the under the VRA prior to Calais. This crazy district here. Would you say that that's a contiguous district that looks like a sane district that anyone would draw under any normal circumstances? Well, it stretches 250 miles, Destiny.
What's the answer to that? The answer to that is I would have to look to case law to see what has been considered a contiguous
well, you just gave a bunch of factors, Destiny.
Correct.
You just gave a bunch of factors. Do you want to repeat them? You had a good list.
I'm not, first of all, I'm not a judge. If I wanted to know how to apply the factors,
you were just explaining to us how the VRA works.
I'm saying that as applied, I don't know, for contiguous, like if you were to ask me, well, what if they were 8% of the population? I don't know what constitutes a sizable minority. I don't know 100%. I'm just saying that this was the framework that existed before. This is the framework that Alito has destroyed. That's what I'm saying.
So under the framework that you're exalting, Louisiana was forced by a federal court to draw this insane district that stretched 250 miles across the country in order to give the black population in Louisiana a second district, because the map that Louisiana drew did not give them a second district. In fact, under the VRA, Louisiana was essentially forced to do one of the most naked racial-based gerrymanders I've ever seen. Now, this doesn't strike me as equal. This strikes as you're being given a opportunity, you're being given a greater opportunity than anyone in any state would get but for the VRA. This is not equal, this is more. This is a special privilege that was given to minority voters, and the problem that Alito was identifying is that the VRA says less opportunity. If you're treated equally, then it's not a VRA claim.
Yes, I understand. I agree. So like this is okay, and I'm glad you said this, okay, because this was the argument, and this is what happened, is you just don't like the Voting Rights Act. Alito didn't like Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and you don't like the fact that a minority group is getting some kind of special privilege to be heard here, which is fine, by the way. You can make that argument, but that's not what the Voting Rights Act said. And Alito didn't like it, and he got rid of it. They didn't get rid of it legislatively, like they probably should have. Alito got rid of it by legislating from the bench, which is exactly what he did, because you don't like the idea that a minority group had a special district created for it, which was the whole fucking point of the Voting Rights Act. Otherwise, why would we even have it? We could just point to the 14th Amendment. We could just scream over and over again, equal protections, equal protections, equal protections. And then boom, we'd be done with it. Why do we even need this law in the first place then?
So, Destiny, when the law said less opportunity, you think we should just ignore that language? We should say, actually, you know what? We're giving, as you just said, minority voters a special power, a greater power, an unequal benefit, rather than rectifying when they are deprived of something that non-minority voters get. So I think you gave the game away, Destiny. I think you gave the game away.
What do you think the point of it was?
The point of it was to make sure that we had a colorblind constitution where voters who are minorities were treated equally. They couldn't be treated worse. What you're arguing is that they should be treated better.
Wait, if it was to be colorblind, why is there any language at all in there whatsoever about minority-majority districts? Or why is there any language in there whatsoever about the majority race overtaking the vote of the minority people?
To force equality coming out of segregation, and we can go back and forth if you want on the benefits and drawbacks of passing laws that would otherwise be unconstitutional in order to rectify past harms of discrimination. It's a rich area if you want to go there, but the language that they used was less opportunity. But what you're describing, Destiny, is the desire to give minorities not equal opportunity, but more, greater opportunity. And this actually is, I think, a very substantive disagreement. I don't think it's appropriate to give people special powers or special privileges on the basis of their race. I actually think that's racist.
That's great if you think that. And I agree with you. I agree that you can have
disagree.
that thought. No, I agree you can have that thought. But then what you wanted was a repeal of the Voting Rights Act. That's what you wanted. And that's
no,
what
I wanted the Voting Rights Act to be interpreted consistent with the 2019 case RUCO, which thank God now it is. What you want, Destiny, and as you said,
when it says don't say what I want. You have no idea. You project so hard.
You want certain people
I'm not even
to get a special benefit on the basis of their race. Did somebody click that, by the way?
Just try to have a legal argument.
I feel like actually Destiny came out and said that openly. Like you
no, I'm just telling you what the Voting Rights Act says. Okay, and I understand that you're saying now you don't like it, which is a fair opinion to have. You can even argue that opinion, but that's not the job of the Supreme Court to decide. That's the job of Congress to decide, right?
You're telling me what it says?
That the Voting Rights Act was created to protect racially minority voters.
So you're not telling me what it says. You're telling me what the intent was.
Do you think that the Voting Rights Act was to protect the majority vote of white people in the United States?
No, I'm trying to figure out what your argument is, Destiny. First, you're saying that's not what it says, but what it literally says is that they cannot have less opportunity than other members of the electorate. So they can't have less opportunity. If they have the same opportunity, they don't have less opportunity, which is my point. You're saying, and you openly said that they should have more. They should have unequal powers, and that's not in the text of the Voting Rights Act.
What does opportunity mean?
Less opportunity than other members of the electorate to elect representatives of their choice.
Correct. So if you have 85% white people in a state and 15% black people in a state, who is that going to protect more?
It depends, Destiny, on the partisan makeup of the state, because nobody has the right.
I'm going to leave if you can't answer this question. If you have 85% white people,
it depends on the partisan makeup of the state.
Do you think that the white districts are going to be gerrymandered out? Who does this protect in general?
Let me explain the point. If the 85% and the 15% were split 50-50 between the parties, and the state nonetheless gerrymandered it so that the black people got no district, that would be a violation of the VRA even after Calais.
But it wouldn't be, though, right?
No, it would be post.
It literally wouldn't, because they would still have the members that they wanted elected would still be elected.
Yes,
that was the whole point. Even if they're somehow gerrymandered out, the members that they want to elect.
Go back to my example. Go back to my example. I said if the 85 and the 15 were equally split between the political parties, right? And then the state nonetheless gerrymandered it so that black people didn't get a district. That would be a violation of the VRA even post Calais.
Gotcha.
What happens
if the racial groups were split 50-50 in how they would vote? Why would we even have a Voting Rights Act?
Well, Destiny, it turns out that there were big ramifications for making partisan gerrymandering legal, and you might disagree with that. But I think earlier you said that you agreed with it, that you thought it was the right outcome.
Wait. I'll agree with Destiny. There's an easy answer to this question. Even if all of the Democrats or even if all the blacks were going to vote for one party or the other, or in the other world, they were even 50-50, the Voting Rights Act still said you can't put a poll tax. You can't have some sort of test that's intentionally to keep blacks from voting. And the argument, well, it doesn't matter. They would have canceled each other's votes out because half would vote Republican and half Democrat, is not to the point whatsoever. So the Voting Rights Act had nothing to do with the outcome of who gets elected more, the Democrats or the Republicans. By the way, it would be the racist Democrats that they were actually fighting against, but I digress.
The people all in the South states right now that their ancestors were all Democrats, right? The Republicans of today whose ancestors
now they're good
were Democrats, right?
They've realized their mistake of being Democrat.
Right? Exactly.
That's right. It's always been the Democrats that are racially focused. Yes.
Of course. So Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act would never exist if the votes were along 50-50 party lines.
Destiny.
Right? Rob just answered this. Rob just answered that.
Let me.
I'm talking specifically about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
Right. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which says that you can't have a qualification or prerequisite to voting or standard practice or procedure based on race, basically, right? And You're telling me that if Democrats voted 50% Republican and 50% Democrats, that we would have looked at that law when it was being passed and said, it's perfectly fine to do whatever you want to keep black people from voting because, if they voted, it would be equal Republican. Of course not. We would still have a law.
No, it just wouldn't be a thing to talk about. Why would
law,
anybody want to try to disenfranchise voters if they're likely to vote either way? The whole point was
the racist
power.
Because they were racist.
You think that in the past, you're laughing and you're making the dumbest point possible, that people would have given up political power for racist gerrymandering? The same people that brought you the 3/5 compromise would have said, well, we know that these blacks are going to vote for us, but let's go ahead and gerrymander them out anyway, because fuck it, so that we lose. Do you understand how stupid that is? There would be no purpose for the Voting Rights Act to exist if we all voted on racially partisan lines anyway, which is what Alito has completely brought us back to. Do you agree? I'm just curious. You agree that there will never be a Section 2 case that like a federal court can realistically hear now, right?
No, there could be some. It depends on.
Let me ask you.
Give me an example of one. Because now, no. Well, besides that's obviously out of the case. I mean, for gerrymanders.
Literacy tests.
For gerrymanders.
Okay. So for gerrymanders, to bring a case now, what you need to show is that they could have achieved their partisan purpose and that there is an alternative map that did not take race into an account that would have done it without disenfranchising, quote unquote, members of that group.
Which totally defeats the entire challenge.
No, it just makes it harder.
No, it doesn't make it harder. You have to demonstrate that any map that you would propose achieves the same partisan ends that their map would propose.
Because the partisan ends are legal.
But the whole reason why they're gerrymandering is for partisan ends.
Okay, but earlier you said that you agreed that partisan gerrymandering should be legal. Why are you
changing this earlier? I'm telling you that right now you
because you said it earlier, Destiny.
Races out of existence. You can gerrymander the races by claiming it's partisan, but the only reason why you gerrymander is for partisan purposes. That was the whole point.
Listen, you've moved on quickly. If I can't, you've moved on quickly from a point I think that's absolutely absurd. The claim that the VRA would have been unnecessary if Democrats split 50-50 or if blacks split 50-50 in how they vote. So let me ask you specifically then, if that's true and no one would have ever pushed for that, let's say hypothetically tomorrow, blacks 90% become Trump supporters and Republican supporters. If there all of a sudden was rules placed to disenfranchise black voters, would you speak up for them and say that that's absurd and that's illegal?
Well, I mean, right now, as per Alito's ruling, you'd be allowed to strip them of their voting abilities by gerrymandering their thing on a partisan boundary.
It's not the question I asked. Ask the question if you specifically would say that that's something, if they just flat out say blacks are no longer allowed to vote. That's good for you now because they're going to vote for Republicans. So would you say perfectly fine by me? I'm fine with blacks
not being black people from voting?
Correct. Or let's say they do it through literacy and poll tax. Literacy tests and poll tax. Would you be okay with that?
Probably not, no.
Therefore, you disprove your entire argument. Yes, even if it would have been a 50-50 split, there still would have been people that said you can't specifically keep black people from voting. You disprove your entire argument by showing you would be one of those people.
What?
You said that if blacks voted 50-50, no one would have ever suggested a law to prevent poll taxes or to prevent literacy tests or other things to keep them from voting.
You said if the blacks voted 90% conservatives.
Correct. And you said, even in that world, you, who is clearly not a conservative and dislikes them, would have said, yes, it's still wrong to disenfranchise them. That's exactly my point. There are people that would have said you can't disenfranchise black people, even if they're voting 50-50, because it's still unhuman, it's still against their rights, etc. As you're doing right now.
I don't even know how you would gerrymander them on racial boundaries if they voted 50-50. This is why the Section 2 argument doesn't work here, and I think Kagan pointed it out well in her dissent that the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act basically defeats itself if the races are all voting relatively separately, because you would never be able to make a contiguous district of minority voters whose vote was being suppressed by the majority voters.
Because you're conflating that the Voting Rights Act was specifically or primarily about gerrymandering, which was never the case. That's why when you're looking at it through the lens of gerrymandering and you're talking about a 50-50 split, you're like, the Voting Rights Act would have never been necessary. Yes, it would have, because the primary purpose was Jim Crow laws of poll taxes, literacy tests, etc.
Section 2 is the big part of the Voting Rights Act that Alito basically destroyed. So that's basically what people have been talking about. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Of course he did.
He did not destroy the part which the primary focus with things like poll taxes, literacy tests, etc. The reason, the intent of it was never gerrymandering. That was never the intent. So when you say they would have never passed Section 2 of the VRA had it been that blacks voted half Republican, half Democrat, that's just nonsensical. They would have still posted it because
okay, I'm just curious then. If right now a state were to pass a law on like Trump's family biography or some shit that like 99% of white people could pass, but 1% of black people pass, would you guys both defend that as being an okay law?
No.
Why not? Wait. Why not if it's explicitly, there's nothing racial about that test, no?
Well, the question is, there's some sort of test, like a literacy test or an educational test.
Sure, make it a literacy test, yeah.
And 99%, well, I'm against sort of those sorts of qualifications.
That's not what I'm asking.
Right to vote.
I'm saying as per our reading here now of the Voting Rights Act, right?
That would have nothing to do with it.
Because you would have, if let's say you had we could just use the examples from history. If you put in a literacy test that basically prevented black people from voting,
sure,
then by the plain language of the VRA, black people now have less opportunity to vote than white people.
What if the literacy test, there wasn't any racial thing about it? That was just the effect.
I am describing historic examples where there was not.
You can't rely on historic examples because that's what Alito didn't want to rely on. I agree with what you're saying because what you're quoting now is the part that he got rid of, which was the totality of circumstances. But I'm saying if there's no racial language, it's just a biography about Trump's family. Yeah. And it just so happens to disenfranchise 99% of black voters and 1% of white voters, like the new gerrymanders are now going to be allowed to do.
Yes.
Why would you be against the literacy poll test or whatever, but you'd be in favor of the racial gerrymanders?
Because in that case, black people would be given less opportunity to vote than white people.
Isn't that happening right now in the racial in the way that gerrymanders happening across other states?
It's not. They have the exact same opportunity to vote and have their vote counted.
But not if they don't. But it wasn't about having their vote counted. It was about having members of their class of citizens being able to.
But the example you gave was a literacy test, which is about having your vote counted, which is why I was talking about having your vote counted and why that would be a problem under the VRA, because it wouldn't have anything to do with the gerrymandering jurisprudence.
Why is it that the totality of circumstances language was adopted from, I believe, from Bolden and then added to?
Who's helping you now?
What?
Is that Kafka or Pisco?
I don't even know if either one of them are awake. I read the whole decision on stream.
Okay.
I'm guessing you didn't?
Go ahead.
Hold on. Look at me right now. What are the changes that Alito suggested to the Gingles framework?
To the Gingles framework? I have not memorized them. I'm happy to we can bring them together.
And how are you even answering the question of whether or not a Section 2 case could be?
I'm making fun of you for looking off screen and getting it from your chat. I'm making a joke, Destiny. Make your point.
One of the most cited cases in the decision. You have no idea because you haven't even read it. You don't even know. I don't even know how you were answering my earlier questions if you didn't even know what any of this even was. How are you answering whether or not a Section 2 case could even be brought before if the whole point of Section 2 cases was they relied on the Gingles framework and now that framework has been completely destroyed? Kagan says we should call it the Calais upturning or whatever instead of the Gingles framework.
Because
you can't explain it. Why are you explaining it now when you just said you don't even know what the framework is?
I didn't say that. That's the thing that you wanted to yell about because there he goes. He got tired.
He left?
Yeah.
There we go. That's very similar. By the way, did people catch that he was using AI during that?
Yeah.
Anybody see that? I thought that was verboten, right? We don't do that. Destiny would never use AI in the middle of or of getting ready. Oh shit. My bad. My bad. That is something that Destiny does. Look, I don't mind the rage quit. All of this, by the way, is a huge red herring. Which is fine. I don't mind to engage in, right? But notice how we went from all of the terrible reading of sort of the Colorado keeping Trump off the ballot and then immediately onto the VRA. And what's the point of this? Let's say at best he disagrees with that decision. The reason that our entire show that we were talking about and your show analyzing this is contextual to the Democratic Party and people like him that are suggesting packing the court. So he's making the argument these cases are so egregious that it warrants packing the court. And you can see he has very little understanding. He's done about as much research as I do on these things, right? Which on these court cases. Now, that's not to say you're not entitled to your opinion on whether or not the case was valid or not. But have you ever heard me suggest removing justices or packing the courts because I disagreed with one of these cases? Of course not, right?
And look, this is why, when people say that we should pack the court because it's all vibes and it's coming out wrong, you should meet those claims with scorn and derision. Because, you know, at the end of the day, what did Destiny come on to argue about? He was mad that I criticized him for saying the law is vibes-based. But when presented with the legal reasoning of the various cases that he brought up, by the way, we didn't know he was coming on. Right. So nope. It's not like I was like doing debate prep and had an outline for this stuff. We're doing it off the top of our heads, you know. And when presented with the legal reasoning, he gets very, very angry because now it's like, oh, wait, that doesn't seem so vibes based. It does seem like kind of a problem to give, you know, only Black people special powers in elections. That doesn't strike me as equal. And by the way, someone clipped that because he gave it away. He said the point of the VRA was to give them special privileges.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and like a lot of things that he's suggesting, it's like, you know, even if he reads these cases, right, so thoroughly, like, how is he missing, for example, the section I brought up from the Colorado case? I forget what the name of the actual Supreme Court case was, but that case, right, where it's like, here were the actual laws and procedures in place even before the amnesty was given. And he was like, well, there was no tools. There was no case. Of course there were, right? And like, you could see, he does this thing where it's like this clever, like constant moving of the goalpost, right? So where it's like, well, okay, now it's, well, after he goes through this long line of questioning, then we fall to, well, can't just, if we have rules for who could get on the ballot as far as signatures, well, then why not say that we can't keep off, you know, Trump for president? Why not? The federal courts have no say whatsoever. And it's like, well, clearly that's not the case. There's been a litany of decisions of the federal court weighing in on people being kept off ballots and the federal court weighing in and saying they can't do that. Right. And so he's just like, I don't know about, it's just amazing how he just moves on. If they say that you have to, you know, have so many signatures for a third party to get on a ballot, well, then, you know, they could say no Trump on the ballot. And it's like,
but you saw the thing he does, right? Which is like, by the way, it's a heck of a talent. Maybe I should learn to do this because, like, you know, if you're going to be a debate pro, you got to learn all the tactics, right? He'll say something that's just wrong. Then he'll realize he's being corrected and he'll just start yelling and saying random stuff. And then he'll circle back to it like 10 minutes later and say, well, what I was saying is X, but he's changed the position. And now he's saying what you're saying. And then he tries to take your side, right? So, and it's this constant shifting of the goalposts and hoping that the audience doesn't notice that he's changing what he's talking about because he was just proven wrong. And, you know, I think ultimately it is transparent once you spot it, right? I mean, by the way, like the reason when he said like that John Smith thing, he's like, oh, well, there's all these people who had this sort of thing happen to him. The reason that I asked him for the evidence is because I wouldn't normally do that to people. Like I normally would assume that if you say this, you're saying it in good faith. But, you know, in our first Nuremberg trial episode, we watched the footage of him saying that he lies and makes up data and statistics in order to win arguments. So if I know that you're lying, I kind of have to ask you to show me the data, right? Like when you and me debate, I don't ask you for that. Like if you were like, oh, there's lots of people, I wouldn't be like, Rob, show me the data. I don't like. I would assume you would never do that, but you know he's openly said he lies. So what am I supposed to do? I kind of have to call him out on it at this point.
And like I get it, his audience is going to cope. He knows that exchange didn't go well. Like he understands it, and like the entire point, like he'll start arguing something. Like you're totally right. He'll switch his position. Like his whole point where he's basically like, no one ever said that you weren't allowed to partisan gerrymandering. No one said that. And I'm like, yeah, that's literally why the Supreme Court weighed in 2019. Here's the cases, right? These cases exist. Well, now I need to read about the cases. But your whole argument was the federal courts weren't even allowed to, no one was weighing in. That was his argument, right? Then when he sees it, he's like, well, but why? What was the rationale? What would it matter what the rationale is? You suggested that this wasn't occurring. It clearly was occurring. Right. And then it just moves instead of like there's never a concession like, OK, I was wrong about that.
And that's the easiest, like in terms of credibility, that's the easiest thing in the world to do. He's like, you were saying that it was undecided at that point. Like, what does that even mean? That's crazy. You're just making stuff up. And then it's like, well, undecided means the Supreme Court hadn't ruled on it. So the lower courts were reaching decisions on their own. And some of them were reaching the decision that you could rule on it, and some of them were going the other way. And then when it is decided, it's decided. Now the lower courts have to be uniform because the Supreme Court decided it. I honestly, having interacted with Destiny a few times, I don't actually think he's so stupid he didn't understand that point.
He knows.
Like, he knows. He's
even
just
the point of the 9-0. He knows what you're talking about there, right? How it sets a precedent to sort of stop these sorts of things happening in the future, right? Because if it's a 5-4, then maybe someone thinks if I just tweak a little, then we could try to keep another presidential candidate off the ballot, right? And by the way, he also knows that had it been the inverse, right, he would have been screaming, howling mad. Oh my goodness, Republican or right states or red-wing states are trying to keep, left-wingers off the ballot. He knows he would have done that and said it was outrageous, etc., and that they didn't have the right to do it. The worst example for me, I have these debates with Destiny all the time, or I used to, before I was, I guess, pseudo-blacklisted. Well, thanks, Destiny, for unbanning me on X, by the way.
Are you blocked again?
I don't know. I'll have to check.
Yeah,
He
didn't unblock me. I feel so slighted.
I will say this, though. I debated this dude, I don't know how many times, on the idea of, whether or not there was a corrupt beginning of the investigation into Trump with like the FICE warrants, etc. And shocking to you, right? I took the position that it was corrupt, right? As you may believe, having heard me discuss my feelings on corruption. Mm-hmm. And Destiny always pushed back on that. The last debate I had with him, in the final 5 minutes, he goes, of course it was corrupt. Of course, that's what Durham said. Thank you, Rob, for coming to my side on this. And it's like, what more need you say? Anyone who knows me and Destiny, does his audience really think Destiny's been telling you for years, Rob, this was corrupt, and you were fighting against him? Does that even sound plausible? But that's Destiny's argument now. He's like, of course, that's always been my argument, Rob. Thank you for coming to my side. It's just that sort of like this bullshit that he tries to do. Which is like, by the way, get super chats in if you like.
Oh,
I don't know how late you could be here.
Holy God, do we have some super chats to catch up on?
Yeah.
But look, I think people paid for the show, and I think they got a show.
Yeah.
Like, I think they got a show tonight. The thing I'll say though, Rob, going back to the original topic of court packing, I think Destiny gave the whole game away. He said that it was better if minorities had superior rights. They had extra rights and privileges. That's what he wants. He wants extra rights and privileges. So what's going to happen if they pack the court? They are going to enact DEI and woke policies into constitutional law. They're going to make it the law of the land that you must give special privileges to people based on their race. It is a vile and racist agenda, and it will become the law of the country. And Destiny admitted it. He admitted that's what he wanted to do. And he tried to say, I've never advocated for court packing. Like, I'm sure that somebody in chat is going to find a good clip that we can use for our next Nuremberg trials on that one, because I've heard him say it. So I'm positive it's out there. But look, that's this is what it is. That's the state of things. Like, they are very upset because they would like to have a constitution that favors some groups over another on racial lines for partisan purposes. That's what they want.
Purely, though, for power for them. That would quickly go out the window if those racial lines hurt them. For example, if you saw in like a state like Florida that it would necessitate like immigrants from Cuba getting their own district that overwhelmingly vote Republicans, all of a sudden that'd be different. That'd be different if that resulted in 0 Democrat seats. The last thing I'll say is this before we read the super chats. All of this is important. I can't stress this enough. I don't really care if people have robust disagreements about these cases. That's fine. No problem there. The conclusion that's being drawn by Destiny and people on his side is, therefore, pack the court. That's why this is so important. And I'll happily have these sorts of debates that you primarily had with Destiny there with anyone on the left on these particular court cases to the extent that I can, based on what my knowledge of the cases are. No problem. I don't mind doing that. But for me, the important thing going forward into this election cycle is these people will make any and all argument to hide the simple truth that they want to pack the court for power. That's it. That's what they want. And they'll make any excuse. The 9-0 court is corrupt. They're corrupt and an idiot because I say so. Therefore, pack the court. You know, and it's like, that's where the damage comes in. And so that's where the bulk of my focus is going to be, because they're welcome to sit there and gnash their teeth and be upset about court cases. Fine. Everyone could do that. But the idea that this means basically make irreparable harm to the court forever by allowing our side, just our side, to pack the court is where it becomes nonsensical. So the case he's trying to make is, the more we focus on the 9-0, even if it's baffle them with bullshit and keep moving the goalpost, that's less time than we're talking about the, dude, you're saying this justifies packing the court. That's fucking bull. If your argument, Destiny, if you're coming in right now and you're like, no, fuck you, I still want to debate this, but of course the people saying pack the court are lunatics and we must reject it at all costs, I'll applaud you. Say, I still disagree with your rationale on what you're saying about these decisions, but fair enough. It's fair to have an opinion. That's the real damage. And that's where my focus is going to be, highlighting the fact that even with all their flimsy fucking, trust me, bro, the 9-0 was wrong, that what their conclusion is then, what we must do is pack the court. And that's what's really damaging.
And look, I mean, that's the one thing he didn't want to talk about, right? Because it's so obviously terrible. It's so obviously terrible that even he didn't want to get into it, even though that's obviously his position. The one thing I'd say, just building on what you said, Rob, is like, I have a lot of problems with Trump. I'm going to be candid. I have a ton of problems with Trump. I think, Rob, you have problems with Trump.
Yeah.
Right? I know a lot of you in the audience have problems with Trump. Like, maybe you're mad about the war in Iran. Maybe you're mad about immigration. Maybe you think the SAVE Act should have been passed. Like, there's people who are mad. I get it. Like, I totally get it. But like, is being mad about Trump worth letting the courts get packed by these lunatics? Like, that just does it. Like, just do the calculation. Like, like, your life will become specifically worse in specific ways. And the laws that govern you will become tyrannical in the ways that Destiny said that he would prefer they be.